Before the sun rose over Jerusalem, before the streets filled with voices and movement, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that followed the most shocking execution the world had ever seen. Just 3 days earlier, a man named Jesus of Nazareth had been crucified, publicly, brutally, and without mercy. The sky had darkened, the earth had trembled, and those who stood near the cross felt something they could not explain. This was not just another death. Something about it felt final, and yet at the same time, unfinished. The disciples, those who had followed him, believed in him, trusted him, were now hiding. The same men who once walked boldly beside him now whispered behind locked doors. Fear had replaced faith, confusion had replaced hope, because everything they thought would happen didn't. They believed he would establish a kingdom, overthrow oppression, change the world in power. But instead, they watched him suffer. They watched him bleed. They watched him die. And with him, their expectations were buried. But what happened next is where the real mystery begins. After Jesus took his last breath, his body was taken down from the cross. A man named Joseph of Arimathea, a secret follower, stepped forward with courage no one expected. He requested the body. Carefully, respectfully, they wrapped him in linen cloth and placed him in a tomb carved into rock. A heavy stone was rolled across the entrance. Roman guards were stationed outside. The tomb was sealed. To the world, the story was over. But to heaven, it was only beginning. What happened during those 3 days is one of the most debated, mysterious, and powerful moments in all of history. The Bible gives glimpses, hints, but not a full picture. And those hints point to something extraordinary. While his body lay in the tomb, something was happening beyond human sight. Ancient texts suggest that Jesus descended into the realm of the dead, not as a victim, but as a victor. Not in defeat, but in authority. Imagine this, a realm of darkness, of waiting, of silence, where souls lingered, where hope had long faded, and suddenly light enters. Not a weak light, but a presence so powerful it shakes the very foundations of that world. Chains break, fear disappears, and a voice echoes with authority no darkness can resist. This was not the end. This was the turning point. Meanwhile, on earth, time moves slowly. The first day passed in grief. The second day passed in silence. And by the third day, something began to shift. Before dawn, a small group of women approached the tomb. They carried spices, their hearts heavy, their steps slow. They weren't expecting a miracle. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary. They came to mourn, to honor, to say goodbye. But what they found would change everything. The stone was already moved, not slightly, but completely rolled away. The guards, those strong Roman soldiers, were nowhere to be seen. And the tomb was empty. At first, it didn't make sense. Confusion, fear, shock. Had someone taken the body? Was this some kind of cruel act? Their minds raced, trying to understand what their eyes were seeing. And then, a message. He is not here. He has risen. Those words, simple, yet impossible. How could death be undone? How could someone who was clearly, undeniably dead, now be alive? But it didn't stop there. Reports began to spread. People claimed they had seen him, not a vision, not a dream, but physically, walking, speaking, alive. He appeared to Mary Magdalene, then to the disciples, then to others, hundreds according to some accounts. And each encounter carried the same overwhelming reality. He was not dead anymore. Try to imagine what that felt like, to go from absolute despair to witnessing the impossible, to see the one you buried standing in front of you again, speaking your name, looking into your eyes. Everything changed in that moment. Fear turned into boldness. Doubt turned into conviction. Those same disciples who once hid behind locked doors would soon stand publicly, fearlessly declaring what they had seen. And many of them would later die for that belief, not for a story, not for a myth, but for something they were convinced was real. And here's where it gets even more interesting. If this was all made up, If it was just a story created by followers, why would they include details that make them look weak, afraid, doubtful? Why would the first witnesses be women in a time when their testimony wasn't even considered reliable in court? Why would they describe their own confusion, their own disbelief? Because they weren't trying to create a perfect story. They were trying to tell what actually happened. The resurrection of Jesus didn't just become a belief, it became a movement, one that spread across nations, across cultures, across centuries, not by force, not by power, but by testimony, by people who claimed again and again, "We saw him." Now think about this. If Easter is just a tradition, just a holiday, then none of this really matters. It becomes symbolic, decorative, something we remember once a year. But if it's true, if what happened on that morning actually happened, then it changes everything. It means death is not the end. It means hope is not an illusion. It means that what looks like defeat can become victory. And maybe that's why this story has never disappeared. Because deep down, people are searching for something beyond this world, something stronger than death, something that gives meaning to suffering. And right here, I want to ask you something. What do you think really happened on Easter? Do you believe this was a miracle or just a story that people held on to? Write your opinion in the comments. I read them all, and I'm really curious to see what you think. Because this question is not just historical, it's personal. The story of Easter is not just about what happened to Jesus. It's about what it means for everyone else, for every person who has ever felt lost, for every moment that seemed hopeless, for every time life felt like it ended before it should have. Because according to this story, endings are not always the end. And maybe, just maybe, that empty tomb is not just a mystery to solve, but a message to understand. A message that says, no matter how dark it gets, light can still break through. No matter how final something feels, it may not be over. And no matter how deep the silence, something could already be happening behind it. So the next time you hear about Easter, don't just think of it as a tradition. Think of it as a question, a moment, a possibility. Because something happened that morning, and the world has never been the same since. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep story. There's a lot more to uncover, and this is only the beginning. The story didn't end with the empty tomb. In many ways, that was only the beginning of something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. Because the real question was no longer just, where is Jesus? The question became, what does this mean now? The people who encountered him after the resurrection were not expecting it. That's what makes this moment so powerful. These were not people waiting for a miracle. They were people who had already accepted defeat. And yet, one by one, everything they believed about reality began to shift. One of the most striking moments comes from a man named Thomas. He wasn't there when the others first saw Jesus. And when they told him, he didn't celebrate. He didn't believe. He said something brutally honest. Unless I see it myself, unless I touch the wounds, I will not believe. Think about that. Even someone who walked with Jesus doubted. Not because he was weak, but because what they were claiming sounded impossible. And maybe that's exactly why this part of the story matters so much. Because it shows that doubt is not the opposite of faith. It's part of the journey toward it. And then, days later, Jesus appeared again. This time Thomas was there. No arguments, no pressure, just a simple invitation. Touch and see. And in that moment, doubt collapsed into belief. Not blind belief, but something deeper, something personal. Now imagine the psychological shift happening in all of them. Just days earlier, they were hiding. Now they were witnesses to something that redefined life and death itself. But here's where things become even more intense. If Jesus really rose from the dead, why didn't he appear to everyone? Why not stand in the middle of Jerusalem and prove it publicly? Why reveal himself only to certain people? This question has been asked for centuries, and maybe the answer is not as simple as we expect. Because the resurrection was not just about proving a point, it was about transformation. The people who saw him were not just observers, they were changed, completely. They went from fear to fearlessness, from silence to bold proclamation, from hiding to standing in front of crowds that could kill them. And many of them did die, not quietly, not peacefully, but refusing to deny what they had seen. People don't usually die for something they know is a lie. And this is one of the strongest arguments that something real happened. Because whatever they experienced, it convinced them beyond doubt. But the story goes even deeper than that. The resurrection was not just about Jesus coming back to life. According to the message they preached, it was about something much bigger. A victory over death itself, not just for one person, but as a sign of what is possible beyond this life. That's why Easter is not just remembered, it's felt. It carries something emotional, something almost unexplainable, because it touches one of the deepest human fears, the fear of death, and replaces it with something else, hope. And yet not everyone believed, even then, even with witnesses, even with testimonies. There were those who rejected it, who explained it away, who tried to silence it. Some said the body was stolen. Others said the disciples made it up. Some claimed it was mass hysteria, and maybe you've heard these theories too. But here's the thing. None of those explanations fully account for what followed, because something happened that changed history. A small group of terrified followers suddenly became the foundation of a movement that spread across the entire world. Without power, without weapons, without status, just a message. And that message was simple. He is alive. So we are left with a question that still echoes today. What really happened on Easter? Was it a misunderstanding? A legend that grew over time? Or was it something real? Something that broke the natural order of life itself? The answer to that question doesn't just stay in the past. It reaches into the present, into your life, into your thoughts, into the way you see the world. Because if it's not true, then it's just a story. But if it is true, then it changes everything. It means that death is not the final word. It means that what seems impossible might not be. It means that there is something beyond what we see. And maybe that's why this story has survived for so long. Not because it was forced, but because it refuses to disappear. Because people keep asking the same question, could it be real? And maybe the most honest answer is this. You have to decide for yourself, not based on tradition, not based on what others say, but based on what you believe happened in that moment when the stone was rolled away and the tomb was found empty. Because that moment, whether you believe it or not, became one of the most important turning points in human history. And it all started in silence, before sunrise, when no one was watching and everything changed. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching. If this story made you think even a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And if you want more deep, powerful stories like this, you're in the right place.